All right, well, while they're carrying that away, I want to tell you guys about a guy from World War I. His name was Alvin York. Anybody ever heard of Alvin York, World War I Medal of Honor recipient? So this guy is incredible. Here's how he received the Medal of Honor. He and his troop, his group of men, he's not a captain or anything like that. He's just another guy in the army at this point. And they're going, and they're going to go, and they have this mission that they're going to go infiltrate the German lines and go get behind the lines, take out the bad guys, and they're going to win this battle. But Alvin York and his men, they face off against 100 and some odd Germans, 30 of which have machine guns, which mow down dozens of his men. And there's 8 guys left, Alvin York and 7 other guys. And these 7 other guys, they're hiding in the shrubs, they're hiding down because they don't want to get shot by these 30 machine guns and these 100 other various German soldiers. But Alvin York, what does he do? He has 2 weapons. He has his rifle, I can't remember the model, and he has a 1911 pistol. So with his rifle, he picks off 30 machine guns. He picks off the guys that are shooting in the machine guns, takes them down so that they're not shooting at him anymore. And then one of these German officers, he gets a group of guys, 6 of them. He says, all right, you guys, you're going to take your bayonets, you're going to go stab Alvin York. So they go charge Alvin York, and he takes out, because he's out of ammo on his rifle at this point, takes out his 1911 pistol and shoots with 8 bullets, mind you, and shoots every last one of these guys dead. And so at this point, he's low on ammo, nothing left. And during this whole time, that captain who ordered that 8 guys to go stab him, or the 6 guys to go bayonet him, the captain is firing his pistol at Alvin, and none of his bullets hit him. He runs out of ammo. And this part where it's maybe this happened, I hope it happened, because Alvin York records in his diary or his journal or whatever it's called, he writes down, he says, this German guy says, hey, are you a Brit or are you a French guy? And he said, well, I'm an American, thank you. And he said, well, if you won't kill us, we'll surrender to you. So they accept his surrender. So Alvin York and his 7 friends, they accept the surrender of this German officer, and 132 total people surrender to 8 guys. And they walk back to camp, and Alvin's superior officer says, I hear you captured the entire German army. And Alvin says, only got 130 of them. This is a guy, he's an incredible war hero. He saves his troop, he saves these guys in this battle in a way that nobody else could have. I mean, they should have died. Alvin York should have died, and he later wrote that the only way that he was able to live is because he had God on his side. That's how he claimed to have lived. And this World War I hero, we see that same event kind of play out in Zechariah chapter 12. Zechariah chapter 12, Old Testament, Jewish people, they're in trouble. There's a world war going on. And in this time, it's not a world war like World War I or World War II, because in World War I and II, we have the Axis and the Allies, right? We have a bunch of people on this side and a bunch of people on this side. You guys know this? But then, when we get to Zechariah in his time, there's Judah and then everybody else. Here's what happens in this passage here. A couple verses here all throughout. Verse 2 and 3, the siege of Jerusalem will also be against Judah. So this is a battle, this is a war, this is a world war going on. And then later on, verse 3, all of the nations, not some of the nations, all of the nations of the earth will gather against it, will gather against Judah, gather against God's people. And then the last verse, chapter 12, verse 9, the last verse that we're going to look at today, all the nations that come against Jerusalem. So this is not just some guys over here, some guys over here. No, it's one group, the Jewish people, Judah, against everybody else. It is the most lopsided world war that has ever happened. It's the entirety of earth against one group of people. And they should die. They should absolutely be destroyed in this moment, but that's not what happens. God comes along, Yahweh, God the Creator, and He acts as Alvin York did, and He saves His people. So we're going to look at 2 different things today, 2 different points, and they overlap a lot, and they intertwine a lot, and you're probably going to have heard them. If you've heard 2 or 3 sermons out of Zechariah with me, you're going to hear these points again. We've already talked about them, but we see today them repeated again and again, and it's important when it's repeated, guys. Whenever we say the same thing over and over again, you need to hear it. And whenever Zechariah portrays it this time, he gives us this example of a battle, a world war that is waging and is going on. And here's what happens. First of all, in this World War I, before any other world wars where it's all against Judah, first of all, we see God save Judah. God saves Judah. Does this sound familiar? Have you guys heard this? Are you getting tired of hearing it? I hope not, because you need to hear it again. God saves his people. When they're in utter distress, when there's no way for them to save themselves, God, he saves them. He takes care of them. Judah in this time, are you tired of hearing how beat up Judah was? The short, sweet, to the point story is Judah's getting out of slavery and they're weak. That's Judah at this time, and they cannot save themselves. And so God shows up and he saves them for them. And it's the same kind of deal with Alvin York and his merry men, or whatever you want to call them. Those 7 guys are hiding in the bushes. They can't save themselves. They're terrified. They're getting shot at. There's no way. They should be destroyed. But just like Alvin York showed up and saved the day, Yahweh, God the Creator, shows up, saves the day. God saves his people. In this situation, God saves Judah. Let's look at the first verse here, because this is how God is introduced. Zechariah 12:1 says, "The oracle of the word of the Lord concerning Israel. Thus declares the Lord, who stretched out the heavens and founded the earth and formed the spirit of man within." Now, he starts out with saying the oracle. Do you guys remember what oracle means? It could also be translated burden. It's typically destruction follows this. But here it says not a oracle against Israel. Instead, it's an oracle concerning Israel. Because the last time we saw an oracle, chapter 9, verse 1, the oracle of the word of the Lord is against these people. But instead, we have the oracle of the word of the Lord concerning Israel. God cares about his people. He is concerning these people. He wants them to be saved. And it's simply concerning Israel as opposed to against these people. The emphasis of this passage is that God saves his people. He wants them to be brought out of this pit of despair. And then it gives a threefold explanation about who God is. Thus declares the Lord, who stretched out the heavens. He created the heavens, and he founded the earth. He created the earth that we stand on, and he formed the spirit of man within us. So this threefold explanation, he creates the heavens and the earth and the spirit of man within. This ultimate creator of everything, of all creation, he is concerned with Israel. He is on Israel's side. He is on Judah's side. He's on our side. That's what that introduction about who God is, this little passage that says, God the Creator, who created the heavens and created the earth and created your spirit, he is on your side. This all-powerful Creator stands with the lone wolf. He stands with Judah. He stands whenever nobody else will stand with them, and he will save them. And since this is a world war, we're going to see a battle forge on through the rest of the passage. We're going to see a battle go around, and every single time that God shows up, God's people are saved. God's team wins. It's a good for them. And here's where it starts out. Zechariah 12, verse 4. Verse 4. But for the sake of Israel, is that what it says? For the sake of Judah, the house of Judah, I will keep my eyes open. Now we're going to come back to this verse in a little bit, but right here he says, I will keep my eyes on Judah. I will keep my eyes open. Now, since this is a battle, God is attacking people. He's hurting people, but he says, I'm paying attention to where my people are. So he says whenever he's going out attacking, he's making sure he doesn't catch his own people. He's making sure that he doesn't catch Judah in the crosshairs. So a couple weeks ago, I went to church camp out at Oil Belt, and we swam every single day. And it was a bunch of first and second graders, or third and fourth graders, I don't remember which. But in the pool, you know what I did to all those kids? I dunked every last single one of those kids. I didn't discriminate. If you were a child and within 5 feet of me, you're going under the water. That's what happened at camp. I did not care who you were, what happened. If you were near me, I'm dunking you. Even some of the kids are, oh no, we're on your side. We're on the faculty side. No, you're not. You're a kid. You're going under the water, so I dunk you anyway. I did not discriminate whenever I dunked the kids. Everybody's going under. But whenever God, he goes out attacking, dunking everybody, he's paying attention to where his people are so that he does not hurt them. He keeps an eye on his people during the battle and protects them. He pulls them aside, he pulls them back and says, I can take care of this. I am going to protect you. And God, whenever he goes into this battle, what we're going to see next, he doesn't take weapons. He doesn't take a sword and an axe and a shield. Instead, he uses his people. He uses Judah and transforms them into something that can allow them to be saved and allow them to win. Here's what happens Actually, before we get to that, I want to show you the result of what happens. Can I fast forward to the very end? Whenever God's winning the battle, the result is found in verse 5, Zechariah 12:5. And the clans of Judah shall say to themselves, the inhabitants of Jerusalem have strength through the Lord of hosts, their God. This is a cry of worship, a cry of rejoicing. We are saved. We have salvation. Our town's going to be inhabited again. The people who belong in that town will be back in that town. It's going to be a good day. God saved us, and we're excited about that. And we want that to happen. They worship Him, and they say, Yahweh the Creator, the Commander of armies, He has saved us. He has paid attention to us, and because of that, our people will flourish. Our people will thrive again. They'll no longer be an endangered species like they used to be. Instead, they will flourish again. They will have a thriving population. And now we get to where God actually turns these people into other things. He doesn't use the sword. He uses His people. And here's what He does, verse 7. The Lord will give salvation. The Lord will give salvation to the tents of Judah first. I got a little ahead of myself in my mind. I'm talking about the sword, and we'll get to that in a minute. How's that? Can you guys deal with that? But first of all, He says, the Lord will give salvation to the tents of Judah first, that the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem may not surpass that of Judah. Now, it does not get any more plain language than that, how God saves His people. The Lord will give salvation. That is the most plain language that you can get. Anybody else want any plainer? You can't, because that's what it is. The Lord will give salvation to you and I, to God's people, to Judah, to the Christians. God gives salvation. He doesn't say, hey, you have to do enough good to get this. You do enough right thing. No, He says, here it is. Go take it. He gives salvation. But then He's got this little weird part about Judah first, and then the house of David, and then the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Talking about their glory, He says this is not going to be just for the people who live in this holy city, Jerusalem. And it's not just going to be for the divine family of David. It's not just going to be for the kingly family. No, this is for all of Judah, all of the people. Not just for the best Christians, not just for the pastors, not just for anybody. This is for, if you love God, you're included in this group. If you align yourself with Yahweh the Creator, no matter who you are, you're included in this group, and that glory does not surpass anybody else's glory. He says the specific people, the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, their glory will not surpass that of the entirety of the people. All of the people, when they are saved, their glory shines brighter than any individual person's. God's salvation is not just for the Jews who live in the city, not just for the Jews who happen to be in this family. God's salvation is for all of His people, no matter who they are. Judah, Israel, all the Jews, everybody is included in this. And for us, Christians, no matter who you are, everybody is included in this. God will give salvation, and that glory is great. Now, God does single out Jerusalem next. Here's verse 8. On that day, the Lord will give protection to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the feeblest among them on that day shall be like David, and the house of David shall be like God, and the angel of the Lord going before them. And the reason He specifies here Jerusalem is not to say Jerusalem's better, Jerusalem's going to get more glory. It's to say whenever the enemies attack, they're going to focus on the capital. They're going to focus on Jerusalem. They're going to focus where most of the people are. And that's why He says, I'm going to make you strong. I'm going to make you like your best king, David. You remember back in the good old days when things were great, and David, he's leading the armies, and everything's great in the kingdom. You're going to be as strong as King David, the giant killer. And He says, for the rest of you people, you're going to be powerful. God's going to give you power so that people will look at you and say, that power is surely from God. And the angel of the Lord, the very presence of God, is before you. You will not be a weak people anymore. You will have salvation. You will be strong like David, the giant killer, like God, the almighty powerful, and like the presence of the Lord in their midst. God is powerful. During this world war, God saves His people. During this world war, God saves Judah, all of His people, no matter what. If you love God, if you're aligned with God, God saves you. That's what happens in this world war. And now we get to the second part, where this doesn't happen temporarily, where God saves and then this happens. No, they're both intertwined. They're both happening at the same time. It's all mixed up. It's all going on at the same time. And here's what happens. God destroys the enemies. Have you heard this before? Have we talked about this once or twice already? God destroys His enemies. The bad people, those who are against God, against God's people, God will take them out. That's what He says. That's what this passage says. There's a world war going on, Judah against everybody else. God saves Judah, and then He destroys all of the enemies. That's what happens. That's what we're going to see. Look at verse 2. Zechariah 12, verse 2, "Behold, I am about to make Jerusalem a cup of staggering to all the surrounding peoples. The siege of Jerusalem will also be against Judah." Now this is where I got ahead of myself too. My mind was jumping to here where God turns and transforms Judah into something in order to destroy the other people. It doesn't, again, not to a sword, not to a shield, not to an axe, but into, what does it say? A cup of staggering. That was literally a really, really strong drink. That's a wine that gets the people drunk, so much so that whenever the other enemies, they come and attack Judah, they will be incapacitated like a drunk guy who's stumbling around. And that's what that passage says. He says, whenever the enemies of God attack God's people, God will cause them to stumble around, fumble around, and be incapacitated, not able to make full speech, not able to walk in a straight line. He will make them completely incapacitated, completely hindered, where they can't function, they can't attack anymore. The enemies are to drink Judah when they attack them, and that's what happens to them. And another way that God uses his people is found in verse 3. "And on that day I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will surely hurt themselves, and all the nations of the earth will gather against it." Now, Marcus, you do some lifting? Yes? Don't nod your head, yes? Thank you. You ever deadlifted? What's the most you've deadlifted? 405? Now, if I try to deadlift 405, I would break my back right now. I've seen videos of guys who try and deadlift way more, and what you're supposed to do, you're supposed to bend your legs and then use your legs when you deadlift. But instead, I saw a guy just straight back, legs locked, try and lift way too much weight. And whenever you do that, you either give yourself a hernia or you black out, all the blood rushes out of you can't see, and then this guy stumbles over and falls face first into some dumbbells on the side. That's what happens to the people when they try and attack Judah. God makes them so heavy and so durable, so dense, that whenever the enemies try and attack them, try and lift them up, they give themselves a hernia, they black out and they fall over, and they can't attack anymore. That's what happens. God causes Judah to become a heavy stone so that those people, when they attack, they hurt themselves in the process. Now, verse 4 is up next, but we're going to get to that in a second. I got to skip over that, and we're going to look at another way that God uses Judah. He causes them to be this really strong drink that causes the enemies to get drunk and incapacitated. He causes them to be this really heavy stone that causes the enemies to hurt themselves. And then verse 6, he says, "On that day, I will make the clans of Judah, all the Jewish people, like a blazing pot in the midst of wood, like a flaming torch among sheaves, and they shall devour to the right and to the left all the surrounding peoples, while Jerusalem shall again be inhabited in its place in Jerusalem." So here he says, I'm going to make them a fire pot. Now, we don't really have fire pots now, but this is a metal bowl type deal with a lid on top where you could put hot coals in and you could transport either fire or, if you guys have seen Pirates of the Caribbean, you'll recognize this. You could put the pot at the bottom of the bed and keep your feet warm during the cold times. It's something to hold something really hot so that it warms up or to transport this fire. And so we see Judah becomes this pot of fire. And all these enemies that are surrounding them on every side of them, they are dry hay, dry grass in a drought. And when it happens, whenever you eat, the flame doesn't even have to touch the dry hay. If it's hot enough, it will light it on fire. Have you seen this? You know what I'm talking about? So Judah, it becomes like this hot pot, flaming hot, and this dry grass all around them, which is the enemies, get too close and they catch on fire and they are devoured and they are destroyed. God's enemies, when they try and attack Judah, when they surround them, God causes Judah to become this hot, flaming pot that causes everybody around to catch on fire, and so they won't be able to attack them anymore. That much heat and that much kindling, it's guaranteed for destruction, guaranteed for fire. And now there are two more instances in this passage. We saw how God used his people. He caused them to be a cup of staggering and a heavy stone and a blazing fire pot. And now we're going to see God actually go out and attack, go out and cause the enemies to be destroyed. And this is where we get back to verse 4, Zechariah 12:4. "On that day, declares the Lord, I will strike every horse with panic and its rider with madness, but for the sake of the house of Judah, I will keep my eyes open." So whenever he's striking these horses with panic and these riders with madness or with confusion, he says, I'm not going to do that to my people. But when I strike every horse of the peoples with blindness. He causes these horses to go blind and to be confused and to be mad and to be crazy, and they're going to run around and be panicked, and they're not going to be able to attack anymore. And now those things, the panic and madness and blindness, those are all curses that God lays out way back in the Old Testament, back in the law, when he says, if you disobey me, Judah, my people, if you disobey me, these will happen to you. But now we see this completely flipped around where God says, because the enemies have tried to attack you, I'm going to cause that curse to be on them, where their horses and their riders won't be able to ride against you, won't be able to attack you. And the enemy nations, they are completely and utterly destroyed, completely rendered useless. The powerhouse weapons of the day, horses and chariots, are nothing before God. God attacks them and they become nothing. And remember, this is the Yahweh, the creator of heaven and earth and of the man's spirit. He can do anything he wants, and that's what these people need to hear. They need to hear that God can cause the enemies to be rendered useless. God causes these people to be struck with madness and confusion. And there's one more instance where God lays it out plain and simple as can be. Zechariah 12:9. On that day, I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. That's as simple as it gets. The enemies of God, when they come and attack God's people, God destroys them. God destroys them. That's what he does. Now, throughout this passage, we've seen the phrase, on that day. That's the final day in the world. That's the final time that anything will exist on this world. That's whenever God comes back, Jesus comes back, the second coming, and judges the nations, judges the people. That's the day he's talking about. On that day, we will find perfect salvation, and we will also see perfect destruction of all those who ignore God and who stand in opposition to God. Now, if you guys want to come up and play, we see Judah in this weak situation. Slaves and weak, no king, no army, nothing. And they need protection. There's no way for them to be able to live on their own. And that's why God shows up and God saves them. And there's no way for them to defeat their enemies. So that's why God shows up and God defeats the enemies. He takes what is a weak people, somebody who is nothing, somebody who can't do it for themselves, and he takes that weakness and he turns it into strength. And I hope that sounds familiar because it's right out of 2 Corinthians chapter 12:9. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. And he says, I'm going to take what is weak and I will cause it to become power. I will cause it to become something great. We are just as weak today as the Jewish people were 2,700 years ago. We're just as weak as Paul was 2,000 years ago. We need help. We need God to save us, and we need God to destroy our enemies. That can only be found through Jesus Christ. He's the only one who truly offers strength through our weakness. We must do as Paul does. We must do as these Jewish people do when we recognize that God causes the enemies to be destroyed and God saves us. We must do as they do. And we see in 12 verse 5, they worship God, and we must do as Paul does, and we must worship God. In this World War Z, let us worship God right now.